The film, based on true events, begins with Daniel Leger, a former drug addict, but now he has quit and become an honest working man. At the gas station, Daniel called his mother. He had received his paycheck as a check, but for gas, he needed to pay right away. When she heard that her son needed $10 from her, the woman simply hung up. The guy had no choice but to leave without paying. Daniel was planning to rent a house, but it turned out that he had been scammed out of his money. We are introduced to another character, journalist Victor Malarek. He takes on the biggest investigations and constantly puts himself at risk. Right now, he had to run away from gangsters he had crossed. Luckily, camera operators followed him, and the criminals did not dare break his bones on camera. Victor missed the birth of his child. An interview was more important for him. His boss, however, forces him to write ordinary articles instead of pestering criminal bosses. Daniel finally cashed his check and immediately started looking for his friend who had left him without a place to live. Michael was partying on a yacht with dealer Glenn Picker. This shady guy waved his gun around, but it turned out he was just joking. Picker pulled out a bag of powder and brought up business. He wanted Daniel to deliver a batch of substances from Thailand to Canada. At first, the young man refused to use, but Picker switched to manipulation and threats. And 6 months later, Daniel relapsed. Victor found material for an excellent article about a major drug trafficker from Thailand. His boss gave the green light. When Daniel woke up in the morning, there was no money in his pockets. Michael was gone too. He had gone to another city. It turned out he had taken all of Daniel's cash. Luckily, Picker offered him both work and a place to stay. He could live right there and fish with the dealer. Victor went to the police station and started asking about that raid in Thailand. Who was that recidivist sitting there? And why had he not yet been extradited to Canada? But the cop did not want to answer. Victor realized he had to act on his own, so he requested money from the editorial office for a ticket to Bangkok. The boss agreed, but with a condition. If Victor did not return with a story, he would be fired. Picker got Daniel hooked on drugs again. The guy spent all his earnings on them. He still did not realize that the dealer was planning to use him for his own purposes. Picker had long been an informant for the police, and now he simply made up a story about a drug lord to sell it to the cops for a higher price. His victim, of course, was Daniel. Picker sent the young man to one address, where he was handed a package of substances. Sergeant Fran Cooper, an old failed cop who wanted to earn points for himself, decided to catch a big fish. But he made a terrible mistake and confused Daniel with a seasoned criminal who was born on the same day. For this setup, Picker would get $80,000. Victor finally arrived in Thailand. However, for some reason, he was refused access to the prisoner. The journalist found out that it was the Canadian police who had restricted his access. The cops definitely did not want him to discover the truth. So Victor turned to the Thai police and began threatening that he would write unpleasant things about them in the newspaper. And the bet on blackmail worked. Picker lied to Daniel, saying that he was going to take care of business in Colombia. The guy was left alone with the boss's powder, and of course he used it all up together with his new girlfriend. Cooper called Picker and said that it was time to begin. The capture of the drug lord Daniel Leger would become the loudest operation of the month, which meant the precinct would receive a huge budget. The team started preparing for the trip to Thailand. Picker took a picture with some gardeners so that later he could show it to Daniel and say that this was a Colombian drug lord and that he was unbelievably influential. Picker remembered that packet of powder, which was already gone. Daniel had to come up with something. He rolled in the dirt, tore his clothes, and smashed his face with a rock. In short, he staged it as if he had been robbed. But Picker still demanded his $1,000 plus a 40% penalty for every day of delay. Daniel had to sell his motorcycle and his grandfather's watch, but the money raised was still not enough. The clock kept ticking. Picker hit the guy and offered him one job, and then he would forget about the debt. Victor finally managed to meet this terrifying drug lord, and it turned out to be the loser Daniel, beaten, sad, and crushed. He was lying that he was a criminal authority just to get another dose. But today, Victor offered the prisoner to finally tell the truth. It turned out that Picker had brought Daniel to a meeting with the cops. They pretended to be drug dealers. Supposedly, they needed 10 kilograms of powder. Daniel had to find a supplier in Thailand and deliver the goods to Canada. But the guy had absolutely no experience in this business. Daniel tried to back out, since he did not even have a passport. It had been taken away when he was last deported from Thailand. To scare the guy, the cops staged a scene, as if one gangster had killed another on the yacht. Daniel discovered a bloodstain and a shell casing. Most likely, the same fate awaited him if he decided to trick the crime boss. In the end, it was the federal agents who paid for his new documents, tickets, and everything else. Before leaving, Victor advised Daniel to confess his guilt, otherwise he was facing the death penalty. It seemed that Daniel was the only one like this in the whole prison. The rest were Thais. One inmate attacked him to take away his carton of cigarettes. Daniel did not let himself be offended and knocked the bully out. After roll call, the prisoners were led into the cell where several dozen people lived. Daniel immediately handed over the cigarettes to the local boss. This was the price for one dose of powder. While Victor was writing his article in Thailand, unknown men paid a nighttime visit to his wife in Canada. It was a warning from the cops, so that the journalist would not stick his nose where it did not belong. Daniel feared being attacked, so he carried a shiv with him everywhere. And today, he needed it. That arrogant Thai guy came back for a showdown with a friend. However, at first they picked on another drug addict. Daniel stood up for the helpless man and inflicted several wounds on them, but still came out of the fight as the loser. Daniel regained consciousness already in the hospital, his legs chained to the bed. Victor learned about the nighttime incident over the phone. He had to hide his family at his colleague's place, but it seemed to be all in vain. The editor-in-chief refused to publish the article. It contained accusations against the police that were far too serious. We go back a little in time. Because of budget problems, the operation in Thailand would have to involve young recruits. Cooper's son, Al, was studying at the police academy, and he gladly agreed to participate in the operation. He knew this job would not be paid, and that training would be required. Meanwhile, Daniel escaped. The cops decided to get to him through his girlfriend. The girl was also dealing, so they forced her to give up her boyfriend. And Daniel had been so close to fleeing the city. Cooper's partner posed as a crime boss. This serious man would make sure that Daniel got to Thailand without any problems, supposedly just for a couple of days, there and back. Victor combined his newspaper side job with work as a television host. And then, out of the blue, he was fired. Of course, this was connected to his investigation and the federal agents. The next day, Victor was fired from the newspaper as well. But then the man received a call from a newly formed Department of Ethical Investigations. A specialist there had taken interest in the case of Daniel Leger and intended to help the young man. Victor's wife was exhausted by all this. Because of it, her husband had lost both jobs, and she and the child were living at someone else's house. It was time to stop, but the journalist seemed to care more about Daniel's fate than about his own daughter. Al Cooper delivered Victor to Cooper with the request to make sure he got on the plane. That night, the boy called his friend. He hoped Michael knew some major dealer in Thailand. But Michael had only ever bought substances from an ordinary tuk-tuk driver. Only now did Cooper's partner discover that they had targeted the wrong man. There really was a dangerous criminal with the surname Leger. But his name was Robert. He and Daniel were born on the same day. Their guy was innocent, but Cooper did not care. He was determined to frame the innocent man. The feds arrived in Thailand and contacted the local police. They would arrest the Canadian with the powder back in Vancouver, while the Thais would arrest their dealer here. That was the plan. The cops installed hidden cameras in the hotel room. Daniel and the dealer were already on their way there. Cooper's partner wanted to cancel everything at the last moment. It was far too harsh toward the kid. But Cooper and his son just told him to forget it. Daniel entered the hotel room with his new acquaintance, the tuk-tuk driver. The young man wanted to leave immediately, but he was ordered to stay. And then they shoved a bag of money into his hands, as if he were the one in charge of the deal. It turned out that the dealer would not bring the goods there. The location of the exchange would be chosen by his sister. So now Daniel had 2 days to arrange everything. Later it became clear that the sister did not want to deal with the Canadians. She decided that these visitors were actually police. So the driver decided to handle everything himself. However, he would only be able to get 2 kilograms. 2 girls, Nipa and Pinpan, were sent to the meeting point with the cops. Nearby reinforcements waited for the signal. Then Nipa's brother arrived. He was forced to get off his bike and hand the powder over to the buyers. Al demanded that the Thai man show the goods. The man, in turn, wanted to see the money first. This led to a conflict. Nipa slashed Cooper with a knife. He immediately pulled out his gun and his badge. Daniel tried to escape, but the street was blocked off from both sides. At that moment, the situation spun out of control. Nipa hit the gas and tried to drive away. Cooper smashed the car window with his gun and accidentally fired. The stray bullet hit his son Al in the head. That was how the million-dollar operation ended. The chief realized that the tracks needed to be covered quickly. The most important thing was to take care of the witness. Daniel was brought to court. The testimonies of the local cops did not match, so they waited for someone to provide the official version. Cooper entered the room. Daniel saw him in uniform for the first time. The man lied under oath and portrayed Daniel as a hardened criminal. The young man, however, declared that the agents had made a huge mistake. They had paid for his trip to Thailand. This was illegal. He had been set up. Unfortunately, the Thai judge, to put it mildly, did not care about this blunder. For possession of more than 200 grams of heroin, Daniel and 3 Thai citizens were sentenced to death. The Canadian remembered Victor's words and confessed his guilt. In that case, the convicted person was sentenced to 100 years in prison. Fortunately, in Canada, his case was being handled in parallel by Victor and the Department of Ethical Investigations. After all, in a Thai prison, inmates die within 10 years, and foreigners within 5. Victor's wife grew tired of living in constant stress, so she packed her things and moved in with her sister. The journalist had to try very hard to convince the woman to give him one last chance. When Daniel returned to his cell, he discovered about 15 letters from his mother. The guards had been hiding them. There was also one letter concerning the investigation of his case, which meant he still had a chance. The letters, by the way, had been passed to him with the help of the drug addict whom he had saved from the other prisoners. That man had connections. 8 years passed from that day. Only then did Daniel manage to secure a transfer to a Canadian prison. From there, he was immediately released. During those years, Daniel overcame his heroin addiction on his own. He personally fought his case to achieve the transfer. Sadly, no one came to meet him. He had lost both of his parents while he was in prison. Victor explained that the police officers who had arrested him were awarded medals for the operation and given managerial positions. As he boarded the bus, Daniel thanked Victor because he had exposed the police conspiracy and saved Daniel from imprisonment and torture. And with that, the film ends. Thank you for watching.